Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of City Plans Panel. My name is still Councillor Jim McKenna, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being streamed on the City Council website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City Plans Panel deals with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receive. The aim of the panel is to hear all relevant information from applicants, members of the public, council officers, to help members of the panel to make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have introduced yourself. If I could start on my left, please, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Richard Smith, Principal Planning Officer.
Hello, Gillian MacLeod, Transport Development Services Manager.
Good afternoon, Councillor Elizabeth Nash, City. Oh no. Sorry, I'm a bit behind on Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Hello, Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Al Garthwaite, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Hello there, Councillor Walsh, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carverley and Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer.
Good afternoon, Daniel Ilmer, Senior Technical Officer.
You may introduce yourself at the back. If nothing else, will familiarise you with the microphone when you will be speaking later.
I've been here plenty in the past few months. So I'm Ian Emerson from CJCT Architects.
Hi, I'm Rachel May from Everson Young Planning Consultants.
I'm Andrew Price from Reform Landscape Architecture. Daniel Roberts from Glenbrook.
Good afternoon, everybody. Old habits. Councillor Dan Cohn from the Audley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Paul Wadsworth, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Graham Latty from Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good afternoon, John Grieve, Governance Services, and I'll be clerking today's meeting.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matthew Hills, Legal Advisor to this afternoon's meeting.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for that, folks. If we can go back to the meetings and get the statutory stuff out of the way, please, John.
Thanks, Chair. Under Agenda Item 1, there were no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under Agenda Item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Agenda Item number 3, the late items. I am unaware of any late items of business. Agenda Item number 4, could I ask members to declare any interest they may have? I see none, so I'll assume that's none. Apologies for absence. Yes, 2, Chair. We've got Councillor Campbell and Councillor Finnegan sending their apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Before we go on to item 6, can I ask the forgiveness of the people at the back waiting to present this? It's a rather special momentous day for us. As some of you will know, Councillor Walshaw is he's having a birthday. I'm not sure what age he is, but I think he's over 16.
47, Chair.
Oh, dear. Oh, well, you're still young. Don't worry. You've got a career in this place yet. Moving on to the main issue for our pause. Oh, can I ask people to sign this card as it goes around the weapon? Many of you won't know it, but our committee clerk, John Grieve, is retiring soon. I don't quite know when, John, but this will be the last meeting that he will be clerking. John and I go back an awful long time. When I first come on planning as a backbencher in '88, John was involved with planning then. And when I became chair of planning in early to mid '90s, John was my committee clerk. And we've had an association around planning for all those years. He served the council for 45 years. He started on a noteworthy day, which is the 16th of August, 1977. Some of you who are Elvis Presley's fans might remember that's the day he died, the day the music died. And John, I understand, is still a great fan. I remember John so well, really. We used to be in the Merrion House a lot, and I had an office over there in those days. And John, as committee clerk, used to come in and sit on chair's brief and help us organise. As John reminded me, that chair's brief in those days used to go on about 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 hours, I meant. It felt like it. It felt like it. And nowadays, it's probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I don't know if John slowed us down in those days, and we're working quicker now that you don't participate, but we'll leave that one hanging, John, I think.
I don't think I had anything to add to them meetings, Chair.
I particularly remember, John, during our lockdown when we had to go virtual. And I have to tell you, I'd never done Zoom in my life. I could just about manage FaceTime on the iPhone after my 7-year-old, well, he was 6 years old then, showed me how to do it. But John got me set up and got me the right equipment. And I think we all learned pretty rapidly in those days. It was a difficult time for us. I found John nothing but helpful all those years. And I think anybody who works for this council for 45 years, it's more than a lifetime, John. It's almost 2 lifetimes. So I'm happy to pay tribute to you and recognise you're a great servant of this council. I'm sure that you've too much energy to just disappear into the ether. I'm sure you'll find something to do in the community. At the time, I remember you did play football for Armley Old Boys, which is my ward, Armley. Maybe walking football you could take up, John. Who knows? Limping football. So I'll leave it there because I know there's a few members around the table who want to say something. So can I start with Councillor Latty, please? Bring your glass. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think you've done a pretty good précis of talking about John, but I know that I thought I'd been on a while, but when somebody's been 45 years working for the council or related to the council, I think it shows great fortitude, and I think that he must have seen an awful lot of change over those 45 years. But I know that when I first came on, I was a bit in awe of him because he seemed to walk around a great deal. You always come across him somewhere, usually in the antechamber, and he always looked serious. And so I thought this must be an important chap. Better treat him with care. And it was quite a while before I was on any committee that he was clerking. But I must say that certainly the committees that he's clerked tend to run like clockwork. I don't know whether that's because he has this sort of aura of control that helps. But I really do think he's one of these chaps who doesn't look old enough to have been here 45 years, quite honestly. So he must have been a child starter, probably an apprentice. But I do want to sort of underline what the chairman said about the quality of your work in chairing and looking after committees. I think it's been outstanding from the point of view that I've come across, and certainly you will be missed. And city plans certainly won't be quite the same without you. So in lots of ways, I'm glad that I've only got 2 more. No, I'm not glad I've only got 2 more, but I'm glad I won't have to get used to another gentleman or lady clerking the committee. And I do, certainly on behalf of the Conservative group, wish you all the very, very best in retirement, and hope that you do find something to do, because I say you're far too young to be going out to grass. So enjoy it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Graham, for those kind words. And I think it'll be a time to mark your enormous contribution to planning. I certainly shall miss you. You're a very active member and you partake very well and bring some very sensible suggestions to the table. You shall be missed. Moving on then, David, the leader of the Green Group. To give you your full title.
Yes, give me a full title. When we got back from site visits this morning, I was in governor service and he was running round like nobody's business. I don't know whether it was because it was the last planning meeting or if we were trying to get scrutiny board out of here in time so we could start. But they seemed to be doing a lot of running about. Anyway, you got that organised, didn't you? So we could get here on the time. I've got to say, I'm on 20 odd years. I've been on a planning committee. I've always found John very efficient, very good, and very friendly, and very helpful to members. If all officers were as good as John, it would be a lot better place. I hope you have a good retirement. As has been said previously, you don't look old enough to retire. So keep yourself busy one way or other, but enjoy yourself.
Thank you, David. I wouldn't want to exclude any of the members. If anybody wants to say something, I will do. Can I start with the birthday boy, please, and then we'll go to you, Dan. Neil.
One word's already been said, Bjorn. Just want to thank you for all your help over the last 11 or something years of being a councillor and on plans. And I just want to point out, Chair, that when we went to Zoom, I did clock the fact that John has an extremely stylish extension on his home. And sorry, like 10 out of 10 for the design there.
Thank you, Chair. I heard this impending retirement and this great loss to our council just the other day. And it actually got me thinking that the very first time I actually met you was before I was a councillor. In fact, many, many years before I was a councillor. I was roped into sitting on school admissions appeal panels. And the training for said panel was done by Mr. John Grieve. I remember sitting across over being talked through the legislation for school appeals panels. And at the time I was a practicing solicitor doing school admission exclusion appeal panels and thinking I didn't know half of this, which was slightly worrying. But you've always had the most tremendous grasp of the policies and the procedures, and it's that calmness that you've brought to even the most flustered meeting. And we will certainly miss your calm and level head. And thank you. I didn't know, though, I have to confess, that the council ever employed people at 10 years old, which is certainly a policy we'll have to look at. I wish you all the best for a long and healthy retirement.
I'd just like to say how grateful I am that you're always so patient. Yes. And you never seem impatient, even though you've had to show people how to use the mics, explain policies, explain the procedures and so on, over and over and over again. But you always come to it with complete patience and enthusiasm, really, which is wonderful. because it can be very difficult when you're a new councillor and you don't really know what you're doing and you feel like you have to live up to everyone else and you don't want to put a foot wrong and look stupid, and you never ever give that sort of impression, and the calm and reassuring nature of your presence makes everyone who's new just feel really at home straight away, and I really appreciate that, so thank you.
John, I don't go quite as far back as some of my colleagues who can remember the old days here. But my husband, ex-councillor Peter Gruen, does. I know you exchanged some words earlier this morning, but I know he would want to be remembered to you, and he wishes you the very, very best for your retirement. My perceptions of you are very much like Councillor Garthwaite's perceptions. You are the essence of calmness, no matter what the situation. You keep us all in order. And for me, over the Zoom stroke Teams era, you've absolutely been a star. If it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't have been the first panel up and running virtually. You sorted us out technologically as well as psychologically, and geared us up for that very difficult period that we've had. Totally reliant on you, and I know that you will be hugely missed when you go, and like others, it'll take some adjustment to feel that I can rely on somebody else as much as I feel I've been able to rely on you. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Can I invite John, please, to say a few words at this stage?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, as officers, we'd certainly echo many of the sentiments that have been expressed already today. I mean, John's been, as Chair said, part of the planning process from my perspective for many, many years, and probably outseen many, many chief planners, heads of service, and most of the staff within the service as well. So he's sort of a constant theme, keeping us on the straight and narrow, guiding us through those processes that we needed to change. Most recently, as you're aware, he's helped to set up the remote panels. I think we were one of the first authorities in the country actually to get back on our feet after the initial lockdown and start having panels again, or committees as referred to in other authorities. And that was largely down to John's assistance with that process and his practical guidance, help and thoughts on how we should go about doing that. So that was very instrumental in terms of getting us back on track. I've got a few highlights. I think Chair's already mentioned the starting date, but there are one or two other sort of highlights along the way that probably worth a mention. John did get his photograph taken with Nelson Mandela in 2001, apparently, when he was supporting full council when Nelson Mandela was made an honorary freeman of the city. I'm sure that photograph is very highly cherished. John won a Golden Owl Award in 2015, a Lifetime Achievement Award. I think the intention was to ensure that he received that before he disappeared. Probably wasn't known at that time he'd carry on for another 7 years, but we're all the better for that, obviously. As I say, tremendous support in terms of setting up the remote panels, and beyond that, clerking some of the major events in terms of panel history, such as the Leeds Bradford Airport application, which lasted for 8.5 years.
It felt like it.
Again,
yeah, we're doing this, aren't we?
8.5 hours. It felt like 8.5 years at the time, and obviously the clerk has got to concentrate for every moment of that meeting. So it does take a real effort, and we do need to sort of appreciate that fact. So again, thanks very much, John, for everything you've done for planning. You will be remembered, I'm sure, and all the best for the future.
Now, John, you don't quite get away with it, I'm afraid. So this is your opportunity to to have some parting shots on the panel. You can get your own back. You could say absolutely anything you want to. They can't do a thing to you. So get in there and give it to them.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, and thank you, officers. That were completely unexpected. I certainly were expecting that. I was expecting possibly end up meeting John's retiring. We wish him well, but I didn't expect those individual contributions. So I'd just like to say thank you very much. I've been here 45 years. but to be honest, I've really enjoyed my time here. I've met some lovely people, some really nice members, like nice officers, and I'll be sorry to miss the cut and thrust of committee life. It's been really good, so thank you very much.
Don't forget the buns, Chair.
I'm coming to the buns. I am coming to the buns. But first of all, John, it's all on YouTube now, so you have the video of it. I'm not sure if I'll be in any trouble over that because I have taken a bit of liberty to doing it this way around. But John's service is unique to the council in my experience. And I know all you lovely people will back me up and say it was the right thing to do anyway. Getting to the buns now. My wife has been very busy. She has been a former councillor, as you know, 14 years in this place, and she remembers John with great kindness. I did say I was going to buy a few cakes at Marks and Spencer's to mark the occasion, and she said, no, I'm not having any of that. John, I'll do something special. I will bake for John. So they're all up there. Can I ask you to help yourself at the moment? John, would you like to be the first person to take a cake? And maybe we could gather around and take a photograph with John around the cakes. Anybody who wants to get into it. Do we have a photographer among us? Somebody who's good.
Smartphones work.
Okay, I suppose back to business. Took a bit longer than I thought. Sorry. I do apologise to you at the back. I hope you forgive me, but you will understand that this was a very, very special presentation. I mean, anybody who works for the City Council all that long, you know, good God. Okay, John, back to business then. Can we go to agenda item 6, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of January 2022? Can I start at page 9? Work my way through it quickly. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. John, your final minutes. Well, there won't be a final minute. No corrections. 100% correct. Any matters arising? You don't often achieve that on this committee, do you? Yeah, we do, don't we? We do. Any matters arising? If not, then can we go on to agenda item 8, pre-app. Richard, do you want to introduce it very briefly, and I'll invite the applicants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few brief words, because obviously it's the applicant's presentation, but if you cast your mind back, we're just talking about the virtual panels. Back in January 2021, some of you will remember that this particular site was the focus of the January panel, where we essentially had an application for a hybrid development, which was demolition of the existing buildings on site, which was the full aspect of the hybrid, and the outline part was to develop the site into a mixture of a residential-led development, but essentially 631 residential units with some commercial ground floor space. That ultimately went through panel approved, and we, after dealing with the Section 106, we eventually issued a decision in the summer of last year. The site has now been sold and is now with Glenbrook Property. We have been working with Glenbrook for the last few months on this latest pre-application inquiry, which is a very similar quantum of development. This is a pre-application for a full application, though this time the outline is not to be followed through. And essentially, it's a very similar scheme in many respects. It's 618 units of residential units with a slightly lesser amount of commercial ground floor space as well. I'll let the applicants develop the presentation from now on in, but essentially we've got 3 key questions that I want members to focus on today. One, which is the scale and the massing, which broadly follows similar lines to some of the illustrative plans that we saw in the outline, but we didn't actually approve those plans, if you recall. We had those shown for, as I say, for illustration purposes, but essentially we took the decision not to approve them, with all matters reserved apart from access. So I want to focus on the scale and the massing. And then the secondly, I want to talk about the materials and the elevational treatment. We are encouraged as officers of what we're seeing, but we want to just get your own comments on that. And then thirdly, the quantum of electric vehicle charging points, which, as you will well know, our policy EN8 refers to 100% of residential spaces to be electric vehicle charging points. The applicants are offering 30% of that as an upfront offer, with the rest to be developed in an agreed scheme over time as and when demand projects as the scheme develops. But essentially, I think we would like your comments on that as well, given obviously the policy does require 100%, although there is obviously some flexibility around the delivery of that. So without further ado, Chair, I'd like to bring the applicants in and let them present the scheme.
Thank you, Richard. That we shall do. Over to you. Can I firstly apologise once again for the delay, but I'm in a generous mood today, so I will allow you a little bit longer if you need it. So don't feel you have to rush, just to make it up a little bit to you. So now's your opportunity. Please present this to us, and we will then ask the relevant questions and make the relevant comments. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard. So we're here today to present the scheme on behalf of Glenbrook. As you're aware, the site sits on the south of Kirkstall Road, as you can see on the screen. The existing site is just over 2 hectares, which you can see on the next slide. So that's the site in question that we're here to talk about today. And as Richard said, Glenbrook have just recently purchased this site. And then on the next slide, you'll be aware that the outline was consented in June 2021, and the parameters that were consented are shown on the screen there. So we have 3 different zones of varying heights and massing. Over to Ian.
Afternoon, everyone. So the project at the moment, I'm trying to read that, of course. So, it's a large site. We've been here before at the outline application stage, as we discussed. And I think the key drivers for this are access to nature. It's a large site. We need to provide commensurate outdoor space with this. There's a large central space that forms the heart of development effectively. There is a focus on wellness, access to nature, and actually engaging with these spaces in a meaningful way, rather than just being landscape for the sake of landscape. We'll come on to landscape in a full detail way in a second. But it's about residents accessing this and actually using it for useful community-focused purposes. It's a fully accessible landscape. It takes in the FAS2 wall and a route over the FAS2 wall onto the sort of river walkway that's being consolidated at the moment. The housing mix, we've increased the housing mix to take into account the 10% 3-beds discussed at the last panel. So it now works as a 50% 1-bed, 40% 2-bed, 10% 3-bed split. We'll come on to in a minute. We're targeting the new Part L, which comes into effect in June, effectively, with a transition for a year. Looking at centralised plants, how we make this more efficient as a sort of distribution of services rather than putting services into each building. These will be centrally serviced where possible. We're looking at 100% EV ready, as discussed previously by Richard, with a 30% upfront delivery of that, renewables and an electric only solution, which ties into new Part L effectively. So it's quite an ambitious package of development, effectively broadly focused on sort of access to nature and landscape at the centre of the scheme. So this was the initial diagram that we talked about at the outline stage, effectively. There is the Kirkstall Road Renaissance Area Planning Framework is in effect in this part of the city. So this brings into effect this central route through the site east to west. So through the city reach developments, which take account of this as they're coming forward, through the Nissan garage, which is not being developed at this point in time, through to Washington Street and back out to Kirkstall Road. There's then also a secondary east to west route along the riverfront as part of the FAS2 works. And then the key drive for this is permeability back into the site to the river towards the landscape that looks out onto the river and the canal structure and sort of green space that accompanies that. So that's the sort of key driver for this, and maintaining servicing at the back end of the site, wrapping through the tannery effectively, around the back onto Washington Street. This is the master project as it exists at the moment within our proposal. So previously, the consent at the outline stage has a sort of 16-storey element in the centre of the site. We've taken the decision to bring that down at this point in time. And also there were 6 blocks in that outline consent. We've now got 5 blocks that have been consolidated. I suppose the key massing drivers are along Kirkstall Road, providing a frontage to Kirkstall Road, albeit that's brought back. We'll come to the landscape section to provide a degree of green space and buffer area to the front of Kirkstall Road. We're just trying to enliven that facade in which it doesn't exist at the moment. Then stepping down towards the tannery building on Kirkstall Road with height in the centre of the site at ground plus 12 storeys, and then addressing the riverside by opening up the spaces between these buildings, terracing down where we can and providing sort of wrapping elements that form the centre of this green space, sort of wrap that in for communal users. And this is how it looks in the sort of emerging context of the city reach proposals as they exist at the moment, effectively. It's part of this consolidated route through from town back out towards Washington Street. And although this isn't in place yet through the Nissan dealership in the centre of that image, ultimately we're allowing that flexibility for this to happen in the future, should it come forward as part of that site, I suppose. Large central green space on our side on the left of the screen, looking out onto the river, addressing the sort of end route of the FAS2 walkway, and then buildings that address the face of that riverside walkway as well. And that's how the massing proposal looks in context. So the image to the right of that sort of white block massing is the city reach proposal. That's sort of steps down from 16 stories down to sort of 10, 11 stories. We're in the ground plus 12 story, at the taller end down to ground plus 8 at the lowest end of this on our site. So the general massing profile is one of stepping up towards the city across these sort of sites as they exist at the moment. And that's our ground floor plan effectively. So we're in a flood zone here. So there's been a lot of flood modelling on this site. We've got no residential at ground floor. We can't support that given the flood, the sort of flooding parameters within this site. What we are trying to do is step lightly onto the ground floor. So it's about putting uses down there that can be supported. It's about communal spaces. It's about a commercial unit on Kirkstall Road that fronts out and provides, necessary commercial amenity to these spaces. And then it's about bin stores and bike stores at this level, effectively, with all the residential accommodation on first floor upwards, and then a quantum of car parking buried below buildings, and then within the landscape, effectively, in a sort of central courtyard to the northeast of the site. And then just a note on the housing mix, we are looking at 10% 3 beds, 40% 2 beds, and 50% 1 beds across the scheme. 618 apartments, and then a breakdown of the numbers of those on that sheet. And onto landscape.
Thanks, Ian. So just going to run through the emerging landscape proposals. And this first slide just to really capture the character of the type of place that we want to create. And it's one that's influenced by the character of the river. So it's outward facing, it's bringing in that, that quality of the river's edge and making something which works with it in terms of biodiversity, but also with the strategic route which runs along the riverside. But primarily want to create a place which is going to help foster a community. We've got a lot of new people going to come and live in this part of the city, and we want to create spaces which allow them to feel comfortable, to spend time outside with each other, but at the same time offering a very generous public space which is accessible to the public. And then we also want to create a place for children, a place where children can explore, can play, can feel comfortable and safe. So these are all general themes which are running through the emerging proposals. And it's going to be a highly sustainable place. So we're obviously creating a setting for new residential development, which is based around a large central park, which occupies about 3,500 metres squared of the site, which is about 20% of the overall site area just in that one space. We're planting over 100 trees, some of real size within the central space. And then we've got large areas of lower level planting as well, which will add a huge amount in terms of biodiversity and allows nature to touch every part of the site. And we're going to make that work with the drainage system as well. So there's going to be a site-wide sustainable drainage system. So it's a hard-working site which is using nature to ensure it's a long-lasting and resilient place. And there's the site plans, as Ian's already gone through, so I won't dwell on this too much. We can see the Riverside Park at the front. I'll talk about the treatment to Kirkstall Road and then the other spaces in between as well. So Kirkstall Road frontage, we've pulled the buildings right back from the edge of the road to allow space for future delivery of a cycle route along Kirkstall Road. So in the interim, there'll be a 4-metre footpath which will run alongside the carriageway, and then a really generous low-level planting zone which will have large street trees which have a real presence on Kirkstall Road. And then that will culminate in the top of that plan image in the main pedestrian entrance along the central streets into the development. And this image of the Riverside Parks allow you to appreciate the scale of the space that we're proposing. It'll be a public space with a huge amount of flexibility, but also a sort of rich layering of planting. So we've got lower level planting around the edges, some larger tree specimens in the centre, and we're weaving in these different play opportunities throughout the space. And then either side of this public space, we've got what we've called the community courtyards. So they're fully accessible, but we're using the planting strategy as a means to create a subtle edge between the main central space and the space immediately adjacent to the buildings, because we want activities to happen in those community courtyards which are for the community and run by the community. So things like growing food, but also other forms of play. So there's maybe a more formal approach to play in the community courtyards. And then we've also got parking courtyards, two main parking courtyards, which we want to have a positive role in the overall appearance of the development. So we're using different types of materials across the parking areas to break that up, but also to allow it to function properly as part of the sustainable drainage network. There's plenty of space in between parking bays for tree planting, and we're looking at different ways of defining the edge of these parking areas, so that when you're in the central street, for instance, that the parking area off to the right is well screened through a layered approach to plantings. There's lower level planting in the foreground with street trees, and then we're looking at these screens which will run alongside the parking areas. So whatever time of year it is, this will feel like a really green and lush environment. And then equally from the riverside, the FAS2 wall in the foreground, and this is over towards building D, and the parking area in behind. We've got the green screens which will run across there, a more open piece of landscape in the foreground, and again some opportunities for tree planting along this edge. Just hand back to Ian now.
Okay, architectural treatment. So we've got 5 buildings once feel that are part of one family here effectively. So what we've looked at doing is building hierarchy of sort of base, middle and top, and a sort of robust planning grid on that, which allows sensible proportion windows, bedrooms, living rooms that are legible across the site and gives it sort of underlying degree of organization effectively. We've then looked at how you address the horizontality of buildings and how you detail that with sort of subtle ground floor detailing, which makes it tactile, which is about pedestrians interacting with these buildings directly, and how you define entrance points to buildings versus primary routes and secondary routes. And then on the sort of upper level of these buildings, we've got 2 sort of typologies that play out against a common base. So, you know, the way they split across the buildings, you know, you look at mixing these things up. So you're providing clear orientation around the site effectively. We'll come on to in a second with the visuals. So one of these typologies is about verticality, and it's about this more of historic reference. It's about warehouses, it's about rhythm, and it's about seeing things in the oblique. So you see a verticality that expresses itself along these key street views. You know, and this is about projecting piers, and it's about windows set back. So you do have an overall rhythm of things that happens in elevation, which might look a bit like that. So then a secondary, sort of a second order of things, which is more about modern interpretation of that, which is about post and lintel effectively. It's about expansive flat brickwork with deeper reveals, which follow similar proportions. There's a commonality between both typologies that work together, which could look like that. And then the key points at which you address and see the sort of mixture of typologies and the way this site unfolds. There's clearly a primary route in from Kirkstall Road into the centre of the site, which brings you through past buildings A and B into the central space where you can look at the river, you can landscape space, you have a view of sort of everything going around you. So we've tried to look at key points along this view effectively. So this is on Kirkstall Road. You see the left-hand side stepping down to the sort of second half of building A, down to the tannery. So there's a sort of clear hierarchy of stepping there, back down to the tannery building, which is important in the context. And then the primary route through into the centre of the site, which addresses the sort of riverfront and the parkway. As you step close to that, there's a commercial unit on the bottom left of that building, on the left-hand side. And then a clear route through the centre of the site to the landscape space at the end of this, which is defined by sort of arched openings through colonnades down that space. A sort of very clear street scene, effectively defined by trees, landscape, and parking across there. And then you hit the centre of the site where you've got, you know, a clear route into this large landscaped open space, the river beyond, sort of 3 buildings that border that, you know, enclose it, provide different uses to open out onto that space, and define these community gardens that Andrew's talked about previously. And then looking back at the scheme across the sort of width and depth of this landscape space, you can see it's broad, it's generous, it's about 70 meters at its widest point. So it's a significant area, which is comparable to Millennium Square in its sort of overall size. And that is us concisely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I have to say, for myself, I've been very impressed by it. Great. Please let's see it develop. Members around the table will have their own opinions, and we shall hear it now. Can I start with you, Peter, please?
Thanks, Chair. First, it's around some of the massing really on this. I used to live just the other side of Kirkstall Road, and one of the big issues on Kirkstall Road is that if you're on it, you feel that you are enclosed in what used to be obviously a very industrial area with no idea and no real connection to the nature that you've got just on the other side of the buildings near the river. And most of those you can't get through and you can't see through in any way. And I think I'm a bit concerned with this plan as you've got it, that the massing and orientation of that first building is perpetuating that a bit, so that if you're on Kirkstall Road, what you don't see is this opened up area of the water space and the natural environment around. As soon as you're beyond that first building, and I get the point that you're trying to protect that for some of the residents to have a quieter space inside, but you can then see through and see these views. I just wondered whether you'd considered splitting that building in half, providing more of a view through, so that you're trying to create that environment that the residents that are there in the community already can then be able to see through, see the river that they've got there, that for many years they've been blocked off access to.
I think it's something we've looked at quite early on in the process. I think the problem with it is it's still 160 meters away from the sort of face of that building through, and there's a layered approach of things happening beyond that, and it makes it difficult to see how that's a viable view through, if you know what I mean. I think what we've got to is the idea that this riverside walkway will become consolidated. The FAS2 works are going to make this riverside walkway a thing, and that once that becomes something, you've got spaces off that are publicly accessible. Eventually people, it becomes a known, doesn't it, rather than an unknown. And the site is permeable by its nature. You live in the area, you know it's permeable, and you start to use this thing as part of a proper piece of city rather than as a development garden, effectively. I think we see it as a public space. We don't want it to be a cordoned off thing on our site. It's part of the public realm. And these buildings acting as individual buildings within a landscape rather than as one development with gates at the front of it. So we have explored it. I just think the way it works with the sort of site and the quantum of car parking, we need to get into this site to make it viable and get people living there, because ultimately it needs to be well occupied to make it a viable piece of city. That doesn't really lend itself to that route through the centre of building A. I think we were better consolidating it down to that sort of streetway through effectively, and almost creating a road through to a space. I accept the point though, that visually you've got to get that link through. I think the sort of roadway does that to a degree. I mean, that's really...
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the approach to tree planting, certainly at the entrance into the site, as you look along Kirkstall Road, certainly along that side of Kirkstall Road, there'll be a noticeable break in the built form in between the tannery and our building A, and it'll be fairly wide and generous, and big trees at that entrance as well, because there's quite a bit of space. And I think just that will feel like an invite, I think, in terms of drawing people down and towards the river, and that's what we're trying to do. Is Ian's saying, I don't think you wouldn't see the river. Say if there's no buildings there at all, it'd be very difficult to see the river itself. But what we want to do is create a sequence which draws people through the site, and then it continues on to the park and then to the riverside. So I think that opening and that sort of break along Kirkstall Road will be very noticeable and inviting at the same time.
So I'm sure go back to the slide. Go back.
Thank you, Chair. You're saying that you want to have this as being a family-friendly development. So I'm just wondering why 50% of the development are one bedroom?
I think the unit mix we've proposed is based on our understanding of demand and need in the area in terms of an overall unit mix. We've taken on board the feedback from previous panels in relation to the enhanced provision of 3-bedroom apartments. So we've reduced the overall unit numbers, which has had the impact of increasing the proportional percentage of 1-beds. But I think the increase in 3-bed unit numbers to the 10%, which has been established within this forum, supports that family element within a city centre environment. And we're looking to support that also with the play opportunities of the landscape and the general community. But we feel that 50% provision here for the mix of units overall and the viability and deliverability of the scheme is the right balance.
Sorry, could officers just remind everyone what the policy is for this?
Yes, I think as we discussed at the previous panel, the policy is flexible in terms of saying it depends largely where the area is, but it does have a guide of a minimum 20% for 3 bedrooms, but that's a district citywide policy, which is I think that was, have you got that, Richard? That's 50%, I believe. So it is policy compliant in that respect. So we're talking about 50% as the proposal here. But it was just the number of 3-bedroom ones which was of contention.
Not really, Chair, because if the minimum 3-bed is supposed to be 20%, and like this is a pre-app, so you know we're supposed to be sort of raising issues like that is a really big issue to me. We do in Little London and Woodhouse Ward have a shortage of housing. Really, it's a very popular area, and if you are wanting to make it so that more families are moving and able to live in the area, then it follows really that you should have a high proportion of 3-bedroom, to me.
I think in regards of the application itself, we will be submitting a housing needs assessment in support of the application. The proportion of 3 beds in this application actually exceeds that which was included within the original outline submission. So we have made a positive step in the direction in response to concerns previously raised in this forum. The key to all of this is ultimately want to ensure this scheme is deliverable and provides the number of additional houses within this area of the city. And subject to the housing needs assessment, we feel the unit mix here is correct to support that delivery.
Thank you. I think your comments are noted. It's quite right on the outline that was the case. And it's only very recently that we've achieved 10%. So we are moving upwards. I mean, on many of city areas, we've only achieved 7%. So people around the table have done a good job. But it is a district-wide. If you look at the outer areas, they tend to be nearly all 3 and 4 bedrooms. In the inner areas, we're led to believe the demand is for smaller flats, like for younger people, 19 to 34-year-old. But we are within policy. But your comments are noted, and I'm sure we'll revisit that one again, Kaylee. Thank you. Caroline, please.
Thank you, Chair. My first question was going to be the one Councillor Brooks has just asked, because on the CGIs, you're definitely depicting family life and children playing. And personally, I don't think that housing mix reflects that. So I would humbly ask you to reconsider that and see if you could get more of the 3 beds in. The second one was about the 230 surface level parking spaces and how realistic we feel that is given the amount of accommodation. Obviously, in an ideal world, we want fewer people to do fewer journeys in a car, but whether that's practical and feasible in this context, I don't know. And one of the questions already down on the paper, Chair, is whether we feel the amount of electric charging points initially provided is sufficient. I would suggest that it would need to be more than 20% or even 100% at this point. And then in general, I just wonder if you could talk to me about the balcony space. Have we got as many as we can have practically? Could you make it more? And what size are they, please?
I think first of all, if we break that down into the three questions I think were asked, I think the overall level of parking provision we have given careful consideration to, and the outline consent previously included up to 242 spaces. I think given the location of this scheme on the periphery of the city centre, whilst it is a sustainable location and we will be looking to encourage public transport via walking, cycling and the bus network, we do feel there will be demand for a percentage of parking spaces for people who want to potentially live within close proximity of the city centre, but maybe also commuting outwards for work. So yes, we have considered the level of parking in some detail, and we think the balance is about right, but happy to consider any comments in that regard. If we look into the electric vehicle charging provision, I think the first point to note is we do take sustainability very seriously, and it is at the heart of our design proposals. And I'd like to clarify that the infrastructure for 100% provision will be in situ at day one. So that will include ducting to all spaces, all electrical distribution boards to enable additional charging points to be connected. We actually did a survey of our existing operational developments with over 1,000 apartments in the portfolio, and the electric vehicle charging demand at the moment is around 0.2%. We do appreciate that that is increasing by the year, and there will be increased demand in the forthcoming years, but we felt the balance of 30% would enable future growth, but also make sure that additional charging points installed weren't obsolete before they were ever utilised. So that a phased provision of the additional points would, one, enable the most recent technology to be installed and increase sustainability and efficiency, and prevent equipment being installed and disposed of before it has actually been utilised. Was another point in there as well, sorry.
It was about the balconies. Have we got the maximum amount of balcony space you can get into this development, and what size are they?
We've got balcony accordance with wind. Obviously, we're in the valley here. Wind is whistling down that river. We've done a wind survey, obviously, and a wind assessment of this. So we're providing them where we sensibly can against that wind strategy. They're all big enough to have two people sat at a chair, effectively. So they're 1.8 meters deep by over 2.5 meters wide. So they fit people with a table, two people sat out there having a coffee or breakfast or whatever people do on balconies. I don't have one, so I don't know.
Hey, I think the panel have started to realise the value of balconies where they can be fitted, particularly with the pandemic and people living in high-rise and who have been isolating at home. So I think in some ways the world has changed. So maybe that's something more consideration could be given to.
I think that's a sensible position to be in. I mean, we all know it's been a difficult couple of years with outdoor space. I think what we do have here is a vast amount of outdoor space that is part of that community, which we're giving back to the site effectively as landscape. And I do personally, I believe balconies are sensible where they are viable. I don't want to sit on a 12-story balcony and have my coffee. I don't suspect I'd be terrified. So I think there has to be a recognition of sensible, useful balcony space with wind and commensurate conditions. So we're trying to work with the conditions and also the landscape to make this a viable proposition.
Councillor Latty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, what you're showing us is a very, very attractive development, and look at making it certainly a very attractive place to live. I wonder, what is your experience over previous developments about the way people actually do live in these developments? I've never had to experience it myself, so I don't know of personal experience, but human nature is such that we're not a naturally gregarious nation, are we? And I just wonder whether you talk about playfulness. and our playful people are probably the most irritating and to be avoided that we know. It's true. It's a fact. So I just wonder, how much actual experience of it happening do you have? The balconies, that's been covered. Yes, the one thing which I was never a scout, so I never got used to points of the compass. Which way is north? I always like to be able to visualize the shadows, and I just wonder if you can tell me where the sun is going to be on this. I know it's in the sky. Damn. Which you're being playful. I questioned the fun.
North is up on those plans. So the plans are orientated north at the top of the drawing, south at the bottom on the plans. So south is a river facade effectively. Broadly south, slightly off, but not far off.
So I actually have to translate that to the images.
Yes, yeah. On the plan, the ground floor plan and the first floor plan, we're going to get on screen in a second here. 1 second.
Sorry, we used always to get a compass needle on the drawings, telling us where it was. It's one of those things that disappeared with time.
It's on the bottom right of that drawing, the compass needle, a little circle with the up, and yeah, true enough. I think north is up. The riverfront is effectively south, slightly southwest, but broadly speaking, south aspect.
I think in terms of your other comments on the experience of the communities and the utilisation of these facilities on site, we've got a number of years experience now within the residential and build to rent sector, specifically since we completed our first development in 2014. Our most recent developments have shown that there's a high level of community engagement. The most recent buildings we've completed and operational, both rank in the top of the table in terms of tenant satisfaction on the platform, such as Home Views, and have over the last 2 consecutive years but ranked top in those. And I think part of that is one, the successful and professional management of these facilities, but also the initiatives put in place to ensure tenants are engaged. This design here very much takes into account the requirement to build that community. You'll note that the tenant facilities are centralised around the green space in 3 blocks. The intention very much there is to make sure that none of the residents feel marginalised in any of the periphery blocks and encourage activity through the centre of the site. So I think we're very much tailoring this to the feedback we've received on previous developments, and this is an evolution further, which has the added benefits of substantial green space and landscaping, which is going to add to that experience. So yes, we are finding these facilities are being well utilised, but they are evolving all the time. COVID being a particular issue, which we've seen an increase in home working in particular facilities around that to assist and benefit residents who don't want to spend all of their time within the private dwelling. So we are trying to encourage that use of community space, and we constantly build upon that.
Thank you. That's quite heartening. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Can I move on then? Councillor Cohen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up, if I may, on Councillor Brooks' comments around number of bedrooms. Our policy is, as I believe, 20%. Officers constantly tell us we've got to look citywide. It would be useful if officers could tell us citywide what the 3-bed is. I believe it's 3%.
No, not citywide.
Sorry, city centre wide. Sorry, I believe it's 3%. And if we don't start moving near a policy, it's just not going to move. It's very concerning. Could you spoke about charging points, and I understand the point you make. Of course, this isn't going to be delivered overnight. This is not going to be on ground and completed for some years, whatever pace you move at. I'm in the process of purchasing a new car or leasing a new car, and actually it turns out that it's almost impossible for me to buy anything other than either an electric or hybrid car, which is great. But that's going to be the experience of lots of people in the coming few years. And I am very concerned, candidly, that 30% is nowhere near enough. I accept your argument in terms of making sure you've got the most up-to-date equipment, but I don't accept that where you are at the moment is anywhere near enough. And I think somewhere far closer to 75% is going to be what is needed by the time you are ready to have people moving in.
Thank you for that. I think the electric vehicle charge points, I too am sort of considering whether to take the plunge into electric vehicle territory. And I think the requirement to ensure the infrastructure in place is a valid one, and we are supportive of the policy generally in terms of we are providing 100% provision of the infrastructure to these spaces to avoid any disruption to tenants and any reasons or delays in installing additional charge points in accordance with an agreed phase strategy, which would be monitored. I think as I referenced previously, the level of being proposed at the moment is very much being dictated by demand. These buildings are professionally managed and operated. And effectively, if there is demand for these, it's in our interest to provide the additional charge points, because ultimately we want happy tenants and happy residents that want to sort of live here. I do, again, just reiterate the concerns that if we install the proposed level of provision, we would have a lot of charge points which are simply not being utilised and then therefore obsolete or disregarded, which just doesn't seem sustainable, which I think the intention of the policy to ensure that sustainable transport is at the top of the agenda. So I think the policy aspiration is correct, and I think we are providing the infrastructure to ensure we can comply with that. I suppose what we're asking for is just a sensible phasing strategy to ensure that what we are installing is, one, properly utilised, and two, the most up-to-date and current technology being installed.
Thank you for that. Al, please.
Yes, I agree with the comments made about more 3-bed housing. I'd like to see that. I agree with the comments about more electric charge points. And as someone who's been driving an electric car for the last 4 years, I think it seems to me that the technology has settled from the really difficult situation 4 years ago where you never knew what you were going to find, and there was a multiplicity of points. And I've certainly not had a problem in the last year. So I think we can anticipate that a lot more people will be having electric cars, and that they will be a more uniform standard of charge points. I would like the balconies to be reviewed. I think obviously if it's going to be really dangerous and the wind will blow people off, then that's a problem. But we don't want that.
Not much of a one.
No, or just be really unpleasant. But, you know, people do like balconies. And, you know, if the plant pots are going to be bowling down the Kirkstall Road, we don't want to see that either. But I think a bit of a review of that would be nice. And I think that regard to the number of parking spaces, there are very good bus routes along the Kirkstall Road. So I do wonder whether we need quite so many actually, but that's open to question. And finally, you mentioned a creche on 3.10. Do you actually mean a nursery? Because a creche is somewhere where you leave a child for a short space of time because you're undertaking a class of some sort, whereas a nursery is full day provision for parents who are going to work, whether it's working at home or working wherever. And I find it a bit odd that it says creche, where I would have thought nursery would have been more appropriate.
I agree.
a minor matter perhaps, but I think it's important to draw those distinctions. And there are different legal requirements for both types of provision, which need to be looked at. So you don't need to comment on the first three. I think you've already commented and given your views on the first issues, but perhaps the creche versus nursery, you could explain a bit.
Sorry, would you just point us in the direction of the comments on the creche? Just looking at the report, I don't believe there isn't a creche proposed as part of the current.
It's page 27, paragraph 3.10. The 356 square meters of mixed use space proposed, cafe, food and beverage and creche would be provided. And I would suggest that nursery would be a very useful thing to have on the site. I applaud it, especially if we can have more 3 beds as well.
I think the intention on this paragraph was to ensure in relation to the flexible space located at the southern end of block F. Potentially a hangover from previous reports. I just need to go away and review the notes on that, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. In the other points noted, I think all we can do on the parking, I think it's been noted a number of times now, so we will go away again and review the provision in line with members' comments here and see if there is a satisfactory resolution to that point.
Thank you. Well, that was a really good point on nursery versus creche. I had when my daughter was very small and we both had to work, we used one just up the road from there, just the other side of the viaduct for the first 3 years of her life. Yeah. And they often are in short supply. So it may well be worth thinking about it for a commercial activity on the site. There's an awful lot of working parents. After all, it is aimed at people under 35. So, you know, that's certainly something that's worth considering and perhaps coming back thinking about a bit more. But thank you for raising that. Paul, please.
I take it, Chair, we're on questions and comments together now.
Well, we did that way.
Yeah. Just wanted clarification on that front.
I'll just take questions, and if you have a comment, I'll bring you in first after. We're nearly to the end.
I'll go on. Well, the question was the public open space on the riverfront and that park that you say, is that genuine public? Because you then mentioned some tenant engagement, and that seems to think that it will only be open to tenants. So it was really just to get clarification of what is going to be open to everyone, whether you live there or not, and what is only going to be reserved for residents. That was just a clarification question, Chair.
Yes, it's all publicly accessible. Yes, yeah, and you know it'll be open and inviting, and we want the public to use that space. Absolutely. Probably my terminology may have confused. Apologies for that. Is I mean, actually, the whole space is publicly accessible. The point I was trying to get across was that there is a sort of subtle threshold between the main space and then the spaces closest to the building. So I think if you want residents to use those spaces for, say, for growing food, then there does need to be an edge to that space. So you can still access it as a member of the public, but for people to have the confidence to use those spaces for those sorts of functions, then it does need to be a level of protection as well. So while it's all public accessible, the main central space is open to the riverside. Yeah.
Please, final question, and then we'll move on to comments.
Yes, I've sat back and let everybody else ask questions, because mine is the usual ancillary question about trees. I mean, clearly alongside the river, you need water loving trees, and along Kirksall Road, you need trees which are pollution tolerant. Could you let me have a list of the trees, please, which you plan to plant? If you haven't got it now, I should be glad if you would send it me. Thank you.
Yes, we can do that. I haven't got it here today, but we'll send that across.
Thank you. Moving on to comments then. I'll bring Paul in and I'll take members'
Yeah, I mean, the housing mix thing is something that needs to be sorted out with the 3 bedroom, because it came to scrutiny, did that, and the policy is still 20%, but they're doing a separate table now for the city centre, which we're achieving 3%, but we're still at 20%. But what seems to be from the last panel, and I raised it at scrutiny about what happened at the last panel, that it became an auction really with regards to whether they went to 10% and we gave them the permission, etc. It's not the way we can work, because this developer clearly is seeing that and thinking 10% is going to get me over the line. But is it what we want as a city? But then I go on to say, and I said this at scrutiny, does 3 bedrooms deliver you a family, or does 3 bedrooms deliver you 3 separate rooms being rented out through someone buying the flat and then subletting it out? So does it bring you a family or does it not? I don't have an answer to it, but it's something that officers do need to embrace, because I think the will of the panel is that we want to encourage families, and I think that the developers probably want to encourage families, but they won't put 3 bedrooms in if they don't think they can rent them out or sell them. And ultimately, we don't really want 3 bedrooms rented out as 3 single rooms, because that just gives us a worse problem than single flats, in all fairness. Councillor Carroll's shrugging his shoulders and not worried about it either way, I guess. but he doesn't. Well, I know he doesn't, but he doesn't get families in. So that's the real point I wanted to make to officers, that we need to get a clear steer about where we're going to go with regards. I think you know where members want to go, but it's a case of having that policy sorted out. With balconies, I'm with Councillor Gruen. We do need as many balconies as we can. And Councillor Gathwaite, things will always blow off the balconies. I've got a friend who's got a 9th floor balcony, and she's constantly lashing and asking anyone who goes to lash things onto the balcony so they don't get taken off by the pigeons and the squirrels and the wind. So it's a ongoing problem. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they run on the rails. They're very grippy squirrels in Leafield Towers, I can assure you. So, but I think we do need balconies, because all the open space you provide isn't useful in a pandemic when we can only meet with one other person and not sit with them. We can only exercise, which we were at, I think, this time last year. So their own public, their private outdoor space is the key to it. You know, I know Juliet balconies, you will like to think are satisfactory, but I'm not sure that Councillor Gruen is shaking her head. She's not going to take a Juliet balcony as a balcony. So I think it's a case of getting as many as you can, preferably south-facing balconies to satisfy Councillor Latty, because he likes them to be south-facing. And just finally on the parking spaces, I think if you were coming in to build today, then 30% would be okay with everything else, the infrastructure in, but you're not. And clearly there's going to be a deluge, as Councillor Cohen says. He's not the only one who's going to buy a new car in the next year or 18 months. And if everybody's going to have to go over to hybrid, there will be at some point that deluge in charging points. And I think Councillor Carthwaite was trying to make the point about accessible charging points, because I've had some put in my ward, which I was offered them for free, and they were going to be all singing and all dancing. And I believe they're only any good for Teslas. I don't know anything about this plug-a-lark. I'd have thought that when we were designing plugs, we'd have had a universal plug, but I'm led to believe you can't, because they all charge at different rates. So it's a case of getting a universal. I mean, why we can't have a universal plug, I still am unsure, but it's getting the ones that people use, because there's no point in having charging points that are only selective to certain vehicles which might not be used. So I think it's doing the work on that before, and I think probably we need a condition to make sure that we get the right charging points in. And I'm rambling now, so I'll leave it with you.
Don't think you're rambling at all. I think you made perfect sense. I did have a side conversation with John about our policy on housing mix, and I think ours is a little unclear, particularly for the city centre. And I've asked that we really ought to look at that again and be more decisive in and provide better guidance to members. Sorry? Well, it'd be citywide we look at, but I think the problem is mainly in the city centre, isn't it, where the high-rise flats. In the outer areas, they tend to want to build 2 and 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms. You know, as a first choice. But anyway, it's something we should look at and consider. And it was fascinating about plugs. I have to admit, I thought we had universal plugs, and it did every car. That was fascinating to learn. Thank you for that, Paul. Okay, Caroline, please.
There were a few mutterings at this end of the table about whether we would agree this is a city centre location, I think, and that's what underpinned my question about the parking. Is it that central? Would be a rhetorical question at this point. Just back to balconies briefly, because we're into the debate now rather than the questions. I think I spent quite an amount of time in the residential areas of Germany. And my experience is that every single flat that I visited, because people live in flats as a matter of course in Germany, every single flat I visited had a balcony. So I think there must be some way of designing balconies at a greater height and a greater size than you have here, because flats abroad have them. Every single flat has a balcony. So I think it's worth actually looking at that issue. Just to take the debate about the 1 bed and the 3 beds a little further forward, I think we do need to revisit the policy. I suggest we perhaps begin to look at that at Plans Chairs meeting, because I do think we need to be clear. I think we need to be clear about what the impact is, because 1 bed flats is creating a particular kind of community, and that community isn't the community that you are depicting on your CGIs. So we need to be clear what we're creating for this area. Finally, on materials and design, I think this is quite attractive, and I like the materials and the tones that are chosen, and I think they suit the area very well. But my question is, looking at page 38, the slide on, is it slide 36 on page 38 of the presentation pack? I'm not sure that in real life you would perceive that brickwork quite as clearly as it looks there from the distance that we are positioned as the observer here. And so the likelihood is it might look a little bit more bland than it's made to look on that illustration, if you see where I'm coming from. So what I'm saying is I like the way it's depicted here. So I hope there will be some perceivable character from a reasonable distance, and that it won't look bland from the middle distance. But the tones and the materials and the style, I think, is very appropriate to the area. Oh, and as a part owner of a hybrid car, I find it absolutely useless. So I think the route is going to be to go through to full electric.
Yeah.
Because it only goes 11 miles on the electric, and then it switches to petrol.
Moving on, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. This question's been raised, and I think it might be my differing view in the fact that the first house I bought in Leeds is not far from this. And I think if that area was a bit more family friendly than it unfortunately has become, I probably would still live there with my 2 children. And I think for me, that connection then and that divide, for me, this isn't city centre, and that's the concern I have in quite a lot of the areas up Kirkstall Road. I see this as a residential area, possibly because I lived there, but I think many of the people who live there are living in Kirkstall or in Burley and aren't living in the city centre. And I'm concerned about that divide, and that's when I come to the 3 beds connection, really. What we were looking at before, I would accept 10% in a flat near the train station in the centre of town, because I think that's where you're going to have single people living, maybe that work in the shops as many people did when I lived in a city centre flat before I bought this house. For me, this is very different than that, and a very different location, and we have a choice of what location we want this to be. And I think it's a family area. I'm concerned that if we're ending up thinking about city centre living, then that happens in the city centre. And that happens there because it is incredibly close to all those things in the city centre. This isn't necessarily, and there's some families that are living across the road there that would love it to have more of a feel of a residential community that I'm worried we're going away from with some of these developments. And in that way, really, this development confuses me a bit, because the level of parking, well, we'd have accepted lower. We're at a city centre development next to the train station. I'd have been calling for there to be no parking possibly, or visitor parking only. Were it another mile out of the city, would be asking for the opposite and probably a bit bigger. With the 3 bedrooms, I'm then on that level. This, I think, needs to be closer to what you'd expect in a residential community than you'd expect in the middle of Briggate. And I think that's where we need to be clearer on many, and that's where Paul's completely right on this. We didn't, for developers that might want to watch later, we didn't set a precedent that anywhere in the city we would accept 10% as our minimum. We set an idea that for that individual development, 10% was what we thought the minimum was. And I don't think that should be taken everywhere else. Because for me, a minimum on this would be, I don't know, but I'd be looking for 20, 30% for 3 beds. And just on that other bit, I get the problem of having a 3 bed. It might not be a family, but it gives you the option of a family that a 1 bedroom flat does not give you. So I'd rather have 3 people living there in a shared flat that then has the opportunity of at some point housing a family than something that couldn't. And to be honest, it may allow 3 people to afford a flat this close to the city centre who otherwise may not be able to afford it. So I think that's really my question. I don't know how we address that fact, but for me, this isn't city centre, but it's probably a fine line of how far you'd go along the road until it was, if that makes sense, Chair.
Thank you for those comments. I'm sure that you've, and it's not just you, it's members around the table, have given planning officers some work to do. It's something I think we probably need to discuss at Chair's meeting as suggested by Councillor Gruen. So we'll hear more on that. Moving on then, David, please.
Cheers, Chair. I share a lot of what Peter says about this and other members. Quite clearly, this site is more family friendly than one site that would be nearer to the city centre, and we need a better housing mix there. I mean, if you go back many years, just across the road and around that area were family housing. So we're trying to bring back that family housing into those areas. So I think we need to look at that. Regarding with charges for cars, I mean, this is going to take a long time to develop. And I would say it depends on what the build out is. Because by the time we built this out, most of your car owners that go to live there probably will have electric cars. And I think that what you've got to look at is how things are going to develop over the next, 5 to 10 years. And I think what you're doing, you don't wait for it to happen, you're ready for doing it. So I think we need, as it's built out, we need the appropriate level of charging spaces. I mean, I don't know if you intend to do it as you build it, but as I say, you've got to work on the intent on the thing as near as possible, do 100% really.
Thank you, David. Kaylee, please.
Yeah, just echo what Peter's saying really. So in terms of the location, there is a brilliant primary school for which I'm a governor, not 10-minute walk away. Yes. Yep. The housing mix targets is 10% 1 bed, 50% 2 bed, 30% 3 bed, and 10% 4 bed. I don't understand why we've got this confusion over whether, it's a city centre location and therefore it should be, 50% 1 bed or whatever. Like, it's silly. It's silly. You look at the location, it's quite clearly not the city centre, really. And if the developer is saying family friendly development, that doesn't mean 1 beds to me. I mean, there's plenty of families that are living in 1 bed accommodation with one or more children in my ward, but I'd rather that be improved on and have more 3 and 4 bed properties that they can live in and get to work from easier. So yeah, excuse my tone, Chair, I am quite angry about it, but thank you.
And please.
Thanks, Chair. I share Councillor Brooks's frustration with this. Council policies do not come from nowhere. They evolve, they are debated, and they are adopted. And we might not all of us across the council agree with them. But it's hugely frustrating when we have them and then just choose to ignore them. And I understand some of the logic of being flexible, almost to the point of breaking in terms of some city centre locations. However, Chair, I cannot and will not keep supporting applications where the housing mix is simply too far away from policy compliance. Our policies are there and we are able to refuse applications if they do not meet with our policies and have a robust defence at appeal because they don't meet our policies. And so, Chair, we have a policy of 30% or thereabouts for 3-bed. And we are never going to get anywhere near our target positive if we consistently approve applications below that. So I put that down as a very firm, clear marker as to my view on this particular issue. And I don't think I'm a million miles away from colleagues right around the room on that. In terms of charging points, today's been something of an education for me because I have not realised how many different plugs there are. Nonetheless, once I've got over that, and I will speak to colleagues more on that particular topic, it seems very clear to me that the current proposal around the amount of available plug and play parking charging points is woefully inadequate for what is going to be needed in very short order. And so as this is, I can't again support where this application is as Councillor Blackburn said, if this was going to be finished tomorrow, that would be one thing, but it's not going to be finished tomorrow. It's going to be finished in some years down the line where demand will be very quickly significantly higher than that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. I see no more members, so we might go on to 3 questions. Come in then, please, Al.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I agree with most of what's been said in comments. So I won't repeat that except to say, to echo that a 3-bedroom flat might not just be a family, although that would be good. It might be, for example, 3 nurses who wish to share. And that happens quite a lot. I'm not talking about students necessarily, but people in their 20s and 30s wish to share rather than necessarily going into single bed accommodation. And we should be open to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Before we go on to questions, the applicants have heard clearly members' views around the table, and I'm sure they will take note and consider these things when before it comes back to us next time. In the meantime, I think we need to look at our policy a bit more closely, and we will do that. Moving on then to page 46, and there's 3 questions. I think I know the answer to most of these already. The first one, do members support the emerging layout and scale of the proposed development? That's probably a yes, is it? Yep. Dan?
Sorry, just to be clear, layout in terms of the outer layout, but in terms of the inner layout, in terms of the flats, I want to be very, very clear. The housing mix aspect of the layout, we don't support.
Richard, you did design this question, so members can be clear.
Yes, it was more about the general layout in terms of how the blocks individually relate to each other, the public open space, the routes through and so on. But happy to take on board what's said about obviously the housing mix and how that would affect the layout. The 3-bed units that are shown are pepper potted throughout the development. So perhaps I don't know if there's any particular views on that, whether that's the right approach, or whether, given obviously what we've been talking about, whether it's better to have actually one block more dedicated to the 3-bed units, so it might foster a bit more family interaction.
Peter.
Just on that point, I think the problem there is with the balance, because if you have one family living in an area where everyone else is young single people, then that's probably not the right sense of pepper potting, and you might be better having a family building. However, I wouldn't like to see that. I'd much rather the fact that there were half and half families and individuals, and therefore making a proper mixed community like you might see in the houses the other side, the terraced houses. So I think that's the problem. The pepper potting approach is perfect, pepper potting approach, if it is the correct mix of houses. But if it is too little, then it won't fit. And it'll be like being the last house left of a family in Hyde Park when the rest of the streets are students, etc. I think that's the difficulty. And I am a bit concerned that we could make Kirkstall Road into the next Hyde Park in that scenario. Student flats in the city centre are where we're going, not to be in a residential area. And I'm a bit worried we might just elongate the city centre so that we allow more student developments and individuals in it, rather than protect the policy that's there.
So on that one, then perhaps we need some further thoughts on it. So we shall just say, Liz.
I lived in a block of flats in Oxford, and it was mainly for postgraduate students, but a number of them did have children. And I have to say that some families were a bit of a nuisance to others. And it reminded me of the playfulness, you know. But families are families. I mean, I've had a family, and I know bringing up children, I know what it's like. I am inclined actually to have blocks for families. I'm inclined that way, having experienced it. So that's my view.
Have you enough guidance on that, Richard?
I think so. I think we probably need to have a chat about obviously housing mix, but clearly in terms of the questions that we were looking more about the layout and the scale, but I think it's clear that housing mix is perhaps a question that we should have been asking, but hear it loud and clear. We need to firm up on
that. Are members happy with the layout and the scale? And we'll shunt that one and park it for a while. Is that a yes? Yes. Yep. Just to move on. I mean, it does permutate into what we've said around the table in other questions, doesn't it? Okay, so layout and scale, we're happy. Yes. Do members have any specific feedback on the emerging elevation design and material palette? Caroline?
Yeah, well, I gave my comments earlier. I think the palette and the materials are really suitable, fit for purpose, and well designed. But I wouldn't want, what I said before was, if one stands in the middle distance, I hope you will perceive that in the same way that it's shown here.
You did indeed, Caroline. So is that a yes for most people? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Is the proposed level of electric vehicle charging point spaces to be provided at the outset considered acceptable? Well, we know the answer to that one, don't we? Okay. And I think that concludes the presentation. Can I thank the applicants? Most enlightening, and you certainly give us food for thought. So I'm sorry again that you had to wait for the presentation, but I'm sure we got where we needed to be. Lots of guidance there for you, lots of guidance for planning officers before it comes back to us. Thank you again, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Do we want 5 minutes? Do members want 5 minutes? Yep. Okay, we'll allow people to change over. Can we resume the meeting then? And if you will, please move on to page 51, agenda item 9, another pre-app. Do you want to say a few words by way of introduction, Tim?
Thanks, Chair. Very briefly to introduce the scheme. Officers have been speaking with the current developers, Moda and their team, for the past 6 months or so, and we've had some quite productive discussions in terms of an iterative process. Members will be familiar with the site, and it's a scheme that outline planning permission has been granted for on 3 occasions over the past 20 years, and unfortunately none of those schemes have come forward. So hopefully this is the one that will get off the ground. I'll pass you over to Andrew now, who will introduce the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Welcome, Andrew and team. You'll know how these things work. You've 10 minutes to present your application, and members then will have the opportunity to ask questions and comment for your guidance. So when you're ready, please start.
Thank you, Chair. I think we did agree 15 minutes just as point of clarity. I think if that's still okay with everyone. Yeah, thank you. Just with it being a slightly larger site. Yes, I'm Andrew Windrus, planning consultant for the application. I'll let individuals introduce themselves as and when they do, but we've got Nick and Kerry, the architects, to my right, and Andrew Price, landscape architect, who you've already heard from today as well. So this is the City 1 site that many members will have seen in this forum before. And in fact, I was sat in Tim's seat when the last scheme was presented about 10 years ago. So a site where now we hope to bring forward this major mixed-use development scheme. We have a Caddick Group and Moda looking forward to bring this scheme and really develop it and want to move forward quickly, as has been touched on in the report, and you'll see on a slide today. So it will be for a major mixed-use outline scheme with residential, office, commercial, and a travel hub, all brought forward. The outline application will be just looking to agree the principles of development, the maximum quantums, It will set some parameters for minimums and maximum building heights and distances between buildings. And then it will also just agree the main points of access into the site. So that's the only matters that will be considered by this application. And as I say, reserved matters application where the detail will come forward will hopefully be closely following an outline approval later this year. I'll hand over to Nick to present the details.
Thanks, Andrew. This first slide shows the location of the site, shown edged red on the image, situated within Holbeck to the south of Leeds city centre. And you'll see the city centre boundary shown as a dark black line. So it's within the city centre to the south. This is a key gateway site into the city from the south, and it presents a significant regeneration opportunity with potential to support connections between residential areas to the south and the city centre. As Tim mentioned, the site has had a long history of planning applications and approvals. Outline applications submitted in 2006 and 2013 related to mixed-use development of significant scale with buildings on the site up to 40 stories in height. Both applications were approved, but neither were implemented. The core design principles of height, scale and massing illustrated on these earlier schemes have been retained and developed in the current proposals. The vision driving these current proposals is to deliver a new high-quality residential-led mixed-use scheme with significant new green infrastructure and public realm to support connections to the wider area. Development will include a new network of pedestrian-focused streets and spaces alongside homes, workplaces, a hotel, restaurants, shops and other amenities. This will be a new area for Leeds with placemaking and community at the centre of the vision. CADIC are fully committed to achieving the latest sustainability requirements and will look to surpass these if possible. The slide on the screen shows a number of the key headline items that will be developed further through the later stages of design. The site itself is in a highly sustainable location within a 10 to 15 minute walk of Leeds Central train station and close to city centre amenities. This significantly reduces reliance on car ownership and car use. This next slide shows the current site environment dominated by surface car parking and the existing road infrastructure. There's a Halford store towards the northeast corner of the site that you can see on the top left image. And there's also a large operational primary substation in the centre of the site, accessed from Trent Street. Areas of landscaping within the site boundary provide a north-south pedestrian route from Bowling Green Terrace towards Sweet Street. However, the pedestrian environment is currently very poor and the whole area is in need of significant improvement. Opportunities and constraints have been analysed in detail throughout the design development process. The sketch we can see on the screen highlights a number of the key constraints that have been taken into account during the design process. These include high pressure gas lines and associated easements to the north and south. These are shown the dashed orange line and the orange tone on the plan. The existing substation in the centre of the site, which is shown as the red toned building. A significant change of level across the site, and that's up to about 6 metres at the lowest and highest points. Noise impacts from Meadow Road, and significantly the prevailing westerly and southwesterly winds. The aspiration is to relocate the substation off-site if possible. However, careful consideration has been given to ensure that the vision and the overall quality of the development is not compromised if relocation is not viable. This slide shows some of the initial sketch concepts developed in response to the site opportunities and constraints. The sketches show lower scale commercial edges to Meadow Road and Jack Lane, with a residential cluster of accommodation of buildings set back from these busy roads located to the north and west of the site. The little sketch in the centre shows heights stepping up from the site edges to a tall building on Sweet Street, which acts as a gateway marker and provides a visual connection back to the city centre. The sketch at the bottom, we can also see the emergence of ideas around some of the key spaces and connections. There's a large central square and also a green boulevard type route through the centre of the site. This next sketch shows further development of the concept. Residential buildings are orientated north-south to maximise access to sunlight and daylight to both the building facades and the green spaces, with the tall building shown in the dark red tone located to the north to minimise overshadowing of public space. Height then steps down from this tall building towards the west to help mitigate the adverse wind conditions. The hierarchy of the green spaces and connecting routes is also now much better defined, with a clear green route through the centre of the site, a large public square, and a linear green space fronting Sweet Street to the north. During the design development process, as Tim mentioned at the start, we've had several very useful meetings and discussions with Tim and his team. These discussions have primarily focused on the principles of building scale, siting, separation, and public realm provision. A significant amount of work has gone into developing and refining a robust set of master plan parameter plans that safeguard these key principles. Importantly, the parameter plans also provide flexibility to allow the scheme to develop and evolve over time in response to changing requirements and demands. And the slide on the screen, as we see it now, shows the key changes to the illustrative massing and the building footprints between July, which is when we first met with Tim, and December last year. And then this aerial image shows the current site condition. And you can see from this that it illustrates a very clear edge to the city centre as it meets Sweet Street to the north, and then large gap sites and poor connections to the south. As noted earlier, this site is well positioned and offers good opportunity to extend the city core beyond Sweet Street and support connections to the south. And development to the site will hopefully act as a catalyst for further development south and west of the site. This slide shows the illustrative master plan, and it's from roughly the same viewpoint as the last aerial image. And it illustrates how the scheme has been developed to lock into the existing urban grain and grid to the north and support these north-south connections through the site. It shows an extension to Bowling Green Terrace to the west of the site, linking through to Siddle Street, and a new green street with the southern gateway arrival point that provides connection through to St Barnabas Road. Massing steps up in height from the site edges to a 42-storey building which faces and addresses the city centre. The lower building scale relates to the existing adjacent built context, and to the north of the site, this lower scale reinforces an existing height datum down Sweet Street and provides the setting for the new linear park. It's important to note at this point that the illustration is just one potential form of development that could be brought forward in line with the proposed parameter plans. Then we'll skip forward to actually now. This 2D illustrative master plan describes the principles of building siting and separation and public realm, routes, spaces and connections that are safeguarded by the parameter plans. On this plan, we show the development of the substation plot, and that's plot D in the centre of the plan. Across the whole site, we can now start to appreciate the scale of the public realm and how the key concepts of space, movement and connections shown on the earlier slides have been developed and integrated. The principal spaces are now also clearly identified, and we can see the Sweet Street linear park to the north, which connects directly to what we're calling City One Square, which runs north-south, and also to the Green Street, which runs north-south from Sweet Street and connects through to Bowling Green Terrace, and also links to the Southern Gateway space on the southeast adjacent to Meadow Road. And this Southern Gateway provides an important visual and physical connection into the site on approach from the south. And then going back to the previous slide, this shows the master plan with the substation retained in the centre of the site. So in this condition, a new landscape boundary would be proposed and introduced to the substation, and this boundary edge would be developed so it's fully integrated with the adjacent massing and building design to form a single cohesive development plot. And you can see from this that the key routes, the spaces and the overall organisation of the master plan remain unchanged from the previous image we had on the screen. And then looking now at the main public spaces, this slide shows the illustration of the proposed Sweet Street Linear Park to give an impression of how it could look. This will be a fantastic new tree-lined public space facing Sweet Street. It will provide the interface and connection to the city centre and will establish the overall green character of the development. At 22 metres wide by 133 metres long, this is a significant space. It provides opportunity for a variety of routes and soft landscaped areas and supports aspirations for a boulevard type green corridor along Sweet Street. City One Square, accessed directly from the linear park, is the central public space within the development. It provides opportunity to dwell and space for seating and spill outs from active frontage at the base of the buildings. This is a pedestrian only space and provides a further north-south route through the site. The scale of City One Square could allow it to be divided up into a number of distinct areas, and it will be developed with the flexibility to accommodate activities and events throughout the year. And then the central Green Street is the primary pedestrian vehicular movement route through the site. It also provides valuable amenity space within the development, with opportunity for people to dwell and ground floor spill out space. Although this Green Street integrates service access and other limited vehicular movement, it's very much a pedestrian priority environment. You can see from the sections at the bottom that generous footpaths and layered green infrastructure will help create a welcoming route through the centre of the development. The Southern Gateway and Meadow Road area will enhance the existing green infrastructure at the edges of the site and create a high quality green arrival sequence when approaching from the south. The illustrative sketch on the left of the slide gives an impression of the Southern Gateway space, and the sketch on the right shows the corner of Meadow Road and Sweet Street viewed from the north. Building lines to these edges are set back along Jack Lane and Meadow Road to accommodate existing trees and also to allow for new tree planting within the site boundary. As shown on the indicative section, a minimum 10-metre setback along Meadow Road allows for a cycle lane alongside pedestrian routes, trees and soft landscaping. The overarching key principles relating to the landscape planting strategy include retention of trees where possible, introduction of rain gardens to support sustainable urban drainage, diverse planting to promote varied natural habitats, soft landscaping within courtyard spaces, and integration of green and brown roofs plus rooftop amenity space. And then this slide looks at the tall building context, and the top left image shows a section through the illustrative master plan with the 42-storey building at the centre of the site. This tall building sits in line with the existing north-south tall building spine within the city. An opportunity to create a new cluster of tall buildings at the southern end of the spine is identified in Leeds' Tall Building Design Guide, and the proposed tall building on the site will help support this and help extend this spine to the south of the city. The diagram at the bottom of the slide shows how City One fits within this north-south spine and also how it relates to the existing tall buildings on the skyline. Now, as Andrew's mentioned, the current proposals relate to an outline application only, and as such, the detailed design of buildings will follow later in reserved matters applications. However, high quality building design is expected, and a robust design guide will be submitted as part of the outline application, and this will include clear guidance on material quality and building design requirements. The outline proposal sets the parameters for future development. The illustrative master plan shown diagrammatically in the top left of this slide is just one example of how development could be delivered. The other diagrams show further examples of possible developments based on the proposed flexibility within the parameter plans. So they show different uses, slightly different alignment of routes, but the principles of the master plan are retained within each of these different configurations. And then this final slide looks at CADC's target timescale for delivery, with phase one anticipated to start on site late summer 2023, with completion December 2025. CADC are fully committed to delivering the scheme, and keen to make a start as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Can I invite members to ask the questions? Who wants to go first? Caroline.
I think looking at the drawings and listening to the presentation, I think the design and massing seem appropriate on paper. But what strikes me is that am I right, 2,000 plus dwellings, which is 4,000 people. It's a whole community that you'd be creating on this. Have you thought about infrastructure such as doctors' surgeries and things? Because 4,000 people is a huge amount of people to just put in an area. And schooling?
Yes, certainly that came up in a presentation with the Holbeck Forum as well, because it's within that area of the Holbeck neighbourhood plan as well. With regard to the doctors, there is that commercial space and the use classes there, which would be able to accommodate that. So again, with reserved matters, and as there is that threshold of residents coming forward, I'm sure that's something which medical practices would be quite likely keen to locate onto this site, and something the applicant will be keen to consider. There are schools within the locality, of course, some of them. There are recent ones proposed as well within the situ scheme. So that's something which we'll discuss further with officers as to the actual access to certain ages and age groups within those schools. And we'll get that feedback, I'm sure, from the education department within the council when the application is submitted.
And equally, the buildings themselves, as depicted on page 76 on those two sketches, they are huge structures, aren't they? So it looks very attractive, the examples of building styles and materials that you put at the back. But I think if we're constructing huge buildings of this scale, it does make the quality of construction and appearance really important. How that would be perceived from ground level, I'm not sure. Really big.
Thanks, Chair. I think Caroline's alluded to it really. I think one of the difficulties to grasp here is maybe scale, because I'm looking at this plan, and when I look at just the 2D plan alone, I see a lot of corridors of green space, and I get the linear park, but I'm a bit concerned that this amount of people probably, there's the courtyard there, and I'm trying to get that size, and I think it's hard to gather that scale without the pictures, but I'm a bit concerned that there's lots of small corridors of green space that you could use. But has there been any thought to whether it would be better to separate the buildings round, place them more around in the outlying areas, or separate from one side, so that there could be a sizable chunk of green space in this? Because I think that would maybe be much nicer. And looking at then the different areas in that, this amount of people is probably enough that would deserve a large amount of green space, park, playground, etc. And I just wonder if you can talk us through that a bit more, because it's very hard to gauge on this whether we're looking at a number of streets such as Cookridge Street, which have their place in the city centre, but you wouldn't expect your children to play there, or whether any of these are going to be areas that you would expect in a residential community.
I just take the first point on the size and scale and position of the public space. Again, it's something we gave a lot of thought to, and obviously one of the considerations around context, and obviously City Park is coming forward, which is a large public space, which will give that type of offer, I suppose, of, the thing about the different activities you do in these spaces, of kicking a ball around, the sort of the sense of openness. We've got a City Park coming forward on one side, and then you've got Holbeck Moor Park just on the other side as well, just the south, I should say. I think also want to understand in terms of the scale of the buildings, also the size of those streets, and the linear street, the green street through the centre is 25 metres wide. So it's about 2/3 of the width of Sovereign Square, but 4 times as long. So they're huge spaces. And because, you know, it's not like we've got two lanes of traffic going through the whole length of it, there is access to the north, but there's a huge amount of space within those streets given over to amenity. And they're going to serve a number of functions, both in terms of site-wide infrastructure, but also amenity. So we want those spaces to really offer a huge amount. And similarly on Sweet Street, the linear park is 26 metres wide. So it's a really, really generous space in itself. It's just that it happens to be quite long as well.
Caught me by surprise, and it think as quick as that. On Meadow Road, certainly there's going to be some planting going down there. But from what I can see here, I can't envisage actually what you're doing. Meadow Road takes in the slip road off at M621 and comes round the roundabout from Dewsbury Road. And I know from working down there for many years, the level of particulate material that's at a low level around there is really bad. I know the buildings you're going to build against that, or not Alfred's old place, are offices. But quite clearly, if sufficient planting isn't done to deal with particulate matter, that's going to spread onto the site. So what specifically are you going to do on that, from Jack Lane down that corner to on Meadow Road?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So in terms of the proposal along the street, the buildings are going to be set back at least 10 metres from the edge of the carriageway. And within there, there'll be a 3-metre cycle corridor, a 3-metre tree line, which will include meadow planting underneath it, and then a low-level planting setback from that as well. So there's a series of layers within the planting, and the benefits, and part of the strategy around there was around absorbing and protecting the spaces within the development from the air quality along Meadow Road, and obviously improving the air quality along the way as well. So the whole strategy is around getting that green edge to development where it fronts Jack Lane and Meadow Road, and bringing that and drawing that green infrastructure into the site. So as you sitting out and have your coffee within the site, or playing or walking along the street, you've got a series of filters as you work towards the centre of the site.
My chief whip's just saying he's going to let me say something.
I did not say that.
But I'm going to say it anyway. The green space. I mean, you're only giving this green space over because you've got a no build zone to the south, and you've got an high pressure gas main to the north, which is logical that you're not going to try to build or move those. But a long linear piece of landscaping doesn't do the same work as a square. And the courtyard, I'll ask you the question, is that going to be publicly accessible to everybody? But with 4,000 people there, I'm not sure whether there's room for any more public people in these areas that you've got. But in effect, where the substation is, which if you remove it, you intend to put another building in there. If you don't remove it, you're left with it. But really, if you remove it, rather than putting a building in there, is where you want a central square. And you may need to get your numbers, put an extra floor on some of the other plots to actually make it work for your business. I'm not supposed to tell you how to work your business, but you know, you've got numbers in mind, and you've got to get to there in some shape or form. But leaving this space on the ground without a decent square that is accessible to everybody. I appreciate the length of the northern edge is good, but it's never as good as a square. A linear piece never works as well as a square. And we've got lots of examples of that across the city. And so that's a comment, Chair, probably rather than a question. But the actual question is the courtyard going to be open to everybody? And how could you achieve more green space as squares rather than linear pieces that would work better?
Please, your chief, please.
And he's happy, yes.
Sorry. So I suppose there's two parts to the question. The first one, in terms of whether the approach we've taken of longer but still generally quite wide spaces. I think the way in which you perceive and use a space is as much about the edges as the size and scale of it. And the City One Square, which we've got within the development, will be very, very different to the Sweet Street Linear Park, which is obviously part of a much bigger piece, which is still yet to come, which will take in other developments. So we think the activity will happen in City One Square will be different to the Green Street and to Sweet Street Linear Park. I think in terms of the size of it and whether, you know, we provide another Park Square or another Sovereign Square, I think our approach has been really is to serve the community around here, both in Holbeck and within this development, but you're not necessarily going to get the same use that you might have right in the core of the city. So for instance, Park Square, you've got a number of transient uses and lots of people going through that space to get from one side of the city to the other, which you may not necessarily have here. So while there's obviously a lot of people come to live in this part of the city, we think the approach we've taken in a sort of a series of linear spaces and City One Square is the right mix. And what we didn't want to create is another big open space, which actually wouldn't have the number of people that you maybe get in the new City Park or in Sovereign Square or in Park Square.
But to a degree, just to add to that, these are the indicative master plan. These are minimum dimensions, which are based on some of those parameters. Could get larger, they can change in shape, and the landscaping is certainly indicative in terms of how that's been sketched and designed to date. So that will influence the shape of the spaces and then influence the usability once the detailed design does come forward as well. So they're certainly things which we take into account and for the reserved matters process.
I think there was a question there, actually. Members who are on the site visit will have seen how ugly the electricity station was. And you did say, obviously, quite rightly, it's in the report. And Tim said on site that your first desire is to remove it. But your second, if it can't be done, then to a landscaper. But it's pretty ugly. I mean, if you were able to remove it, would you be planning to turn that into more green space, or as Paul said, build some more on that site? But it is pretty ugly, as anybody who was on the site visit will have seen.
The applicant is working very hard with other departments of the council to try and relocate that substation and looking at whether there are land opportunities to move it nearby. So that's certainly something they clearly don't want to have that within the site. You know, that does them no favours at all in their respect. There is a building as an alternative within the parameters proposed within that site. Yes, if it was to relocate though.
Actually, mine's been covered, so I'll reserve it for comments.
Back on the substation again, it was extremely ugly, and I get the planting if it cannot be moved. But would you do anything with the actual structure itself to make it a bit more palatable? And the second question is, if you do remove the substation and there is another building planned for that space, would you consider additional green space there instead?
So just on the first part of that question, if the substation does stay, we would be looking to refurbish the brickwork. The brickwork itself is actually quite good quality, and there is some decent modelling at the top of the substation. Doors and louvers, all the things that can easily be replaced, would be replaced. But I think, as we mentioned in the presentation, we would be looking to screen that substation with a landscape screen. we'd be looking to plants inside the existing substation boundary. So the actual visual amenity is much better, and you're not just looking through to the blank substation walls, you're actually looking through layers of landscape from the public realm. So yes, it would be significantly improved in terms of visual appearance.
Whether it's green space or not.
Or can it be replaced with green space?
Yeah. Councillor Gruen did ask if it could be green space and not a building, and that was my question. And perhaps I hadn't asked it quite concisely as Caroline has, but it's probably well worth addressing that at this point.
As they're currently drawn up, the parameter plans show a building on the substation site, but they are parameter plans. This is an outline application, so there is detailed design to be done at the next stage. So that doesn't preclude more green space on the substation site, but we are showing a building on that site at present.
Okay, I think that's more helpful. Thank you. Kaylee.
Thanks, Chair. I share Collie's concern about the green spaces being basically corridors. And I also have some concerns that would they be actually usable, because they could just turn into wind tunnels. So would people be able to comfortably use them both as walkways and as amenity space? I mean, that's number one, I suppose. But then also in terms of the uses of that amenity space, it is, as other colleagues have rightly pointed out, very limited in terms of what you could do with it. I mean, a playing field would be preferable, really, wouldn't it? For play, ball games and whatnot. Thank you.
I think in terms of the wind, we've done some CFD modelling, so that's in process, and we're looking at that in terms of the comfort levels within those spaces. And at the moment, we're progressing that well. There's no significant levels of issues with comfort along that Green Street. It's very well protected. The buildings protect it from the prevailing winds of the Green Street. There's no issues along there. And also along the western eastern edge of the linear park as well.
So I think, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say as well, in terms of the tall building, 40 stories, I think it is.
42.
Yeah, 40
from ground.
So like in terms of the treatment of that building, is it going to be 100% safe in terms of the wind speeds that building's going to encounter?
As I say, we've done the CFD analysis and it's not presenting any safety issues on the wind modelling at the moment based on the illustrative master plan. There's obviously a few screens within the landscape that we'll need to add into some hotspots within the development site. But in terms of the actual form and the mass at the moment, it doesn't present any wind problems in that area of the site.
And just to expand on that, as we touched on in the presentation, the massing has been deliberately kind of organised to step up from the west. It's the westerly winds that are the prevailing winds, and those lower buildings, they really do screen that tall building. There's not actually a huge amount of wind impact directly onto that building or effects from that tall building because they are screened by the lower buildings to the west.
You, Al, please.
Yes, quite a lot of that's been covered. But thinking back to the previous application that we discussed, would you allow sufficient space for a nursery? Because I think with that number of people, they might well find a nursery extremely valuable on site.
Yes, again, with the reserve matters, I think that's something which could certainly come forward within the scope of this outline through the reserve matters, subject to which building block comes forward, where that demand is. the threshold of when residential tips into that. But yes, that will certainly be considered going forward. Yeah.
I see no more questions. Is there a question or comment? Okay. You can have first comment then, Peter.
Thank you. I'm getting my finger up first today. My comments build on from the previous one. I'm trying to do my sums, and if I've worked it out right on the numbers, then effectively this is as big as one of the villages I represent out in the Outer West. This could be the entire village of Carverley if my sums are right, and they've got a 200 metre by 200 metre park right in the middle. That is incredibly busy. What they don't have is then all the people that will work in the office buildings that will be around here, that will be additional population on top of that. So, I mean, the village of Carverley manages to have that large park in the middle. It covers 2 or 3 nurseries, I think, 2 primary schools, and all of the rest of it for those kind of communities. Now, unfortunately, not everywhere in the city has the things that we have benefit to in the leafy suburbs in the Outer West. But through planning, my aim is to try and make sure that everywhere in the city does have that, regardless of whether it's in Beeston, in Bermontofts, or out in the edge. So I have real concerns that what we're creating here is something that's a bit like what was in these areas that we're trying to get rid of, rather than what it possibly could be. And therefore I'm a bit underwhelmed really with the scale. And I think that's the difficulty of just seeing this size. Were it to come through as 4 separate plots, I think we'd have been asking for a lot more from each individual plot that's there. And I think it may be somewhat hidden away. The other comment, no, I couldn't go on the site visit today, unfortunately. So I apologise for that, because I'd have been interested to. But I note that the amount of green space there isn't too different to what's there at the moment, when it next to the side of a car park, as far as I can see on some of it. And probably I think people would say that that's not enough and not really usable. So I think that's my thoughts. In this amount of area, you are building a whole new village, and I would therefore expect and hope to see, to get the best out of planning, everything that village needs come through. If this is that master plan, I'm afraid somewhat underwhelmed with this compared to some other proposals we may have seen. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, I was going to make very similar comments to Councillor Carlisle, really. Perhaps not using a village analogy, but it's no, it's aptly done and well made.
A village as well, is it?
Well, it takes a village, as they say. Underwhelming is, I think, my overall impression. To me, looking at this, and I appreciate it as early days, and there's some excellent sort of build-up slides and content in this presentation. But when we get to the massing and the forming, and taking care that it is only outline, but you look at this, this is a whole new community, or indeed a village, as Peter said. But what this looks like when you're looking at it, this is trying to build, and sort of slip in a bit of a city that's existed for a long time. Do you know what I mean? If this had been here, this could have been the building form, the structure, the massing, the scale on the site. Doesn't feel hugely cohesive. It feels like you're trying to get away with adding a bit of the city centre on that's been there for a long time. And that if you walk through it, you perhaps would not know that this was an opportunity to master plan an incredibly significant strategic city centre site share. Do you see where I'm coming from? I hope that makes sense. And I think, well, you never know, do you? Good to have a check mid-rant. But I think that's my overall impression. I'm concerned in the green space is navigation routes, it's happenstance. The linear park at the end kind of looks like a cop-out, folks, I have to say, as to where you want to put green space. Given that the opportunity is to significantly master plan this, given there's an opportunity that we might be able to move the substation, that this has got an awful long way to go in terms of design, massing, and effectively, you might want to say that it's got quite a lot of issues regarding the entire philosophy of what's been proposed. The underpinning philosophy, I think, is wrong to an extent, and I think that's real concerns. But so there are those overall issues. But then when we moved to detail matters, we'd really want to see, because of the scale, because of the sheer number of units, because it is actually a new community. And whilst that is acknowledged in some of the presentation, it doesn't come out enough yet, Chair. And we don't see a really positive approach to housing mix. And that, yes, this is an adjunct to the city centre or part of the city centre, it is an area where, if you might have caught the earlier debate for the previous period, we'd really want to see it attractive to a whole broad swathe of the population, not just hip 20-somethings in the one-bedroom flats and their Netflix accounts and their Starbucks accounts, right? Because apparently that's how you're able to afford a home chair now, if you just cancel your Netflix. But anyway, more seriously, I think there's a lot to go yet. I'm keen to see the outline come forward, but it's got to come forward acknowledging everything we've said, and it's got to be policy compliant. You know, we do want to see this site develop, but it's certainly not at any cost. And I think that has probably come loud and clear from the previous item from colleagues and on this one, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right. Yes, well, put it this way. Early this afternoon, we've looked at a similar development of a large space, which was going to create, or wanted to create, a community. Now then, this isn't just a large space. I mean, people have been talking about a village. To me, it's almost a little township. It is going to be huge. And I think that even starting to try and think about creating a community is probably hoping for the impossible, that you're going to have to create somewhere that people want to live, but also an area which has its built-in facilities. I mean, there's not a fat lot round there anyway now, when you look at that area. So you're going to be putting life into a pretty dead bit of Leeds. So there's a great deal to do to make it fit and make it work. There has been things said. Well, no, before I say that, the other thing is about the treatment of the development itself. And yes, you've given us a wonderful presentation and impressions of what you're going to do, but because of its size, there isn't going to be a one design fits all here. It's going to have to be, when you come along with the actual application, it's going to have to respect the fact that it is big and therefore have some different aspects of design with the buildings individually, I hope, even though I won't be here to see it. And another thing, we've had lots of requests for different facilities. And as I say, bearing in mind its size and the lack of anything within reasonable distance of there, apart from coming into the centre, it is going to have the sort of facilities that we all come to expect to make life reasonable. We've talked about facilities for children. We've talked about facilities for young people, but something this size is also going to have some old people there. You know, it's not going to be everybody under 40. There's going to be a good cross section of people, and I do think that we have to think in terms of catering for people who can no longer run up the stairs to the flats and all this sort of thing, and hang over the balconies and that sort of thing. You know, you've got to think that this is the whole of life is going to be in this place, and I just haven't got the feeling that depth of vision has been applied to this. We tend to think always, as I say, about young people who are living the life and going outside and mixing and having drinks together, and the children are playing together outside. That's going to be difficult in these corridors of green, because once again, there's been plenty of requests today for an area of green space, not just little green corridors. And if you want people to get together, because I'm afraid I'm one of the doubters on this panel about people's ability to create communities without a really good shove. You know, they need something to make them do it. So I think plenty of in-depth thought about shape and size of green spaces and the cross-section of people who are going to be living here, because they ain't all going to be kids.
Thank you, Graham. Kayleigh, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just like to echo all of my colleagues, really. I've got. I think we're sort of beating around the bush with it, really. The development is too dense. We need to remove some of the buildings in order to free up some green space. I think, like, rather than dancing around the issue, I thought I'd just come straight out and say it. But otherwise, support everything that colleagues have said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kaylee. Liz, please.
Yes, I follow on quite nicely from what everybody else has said. There's far too much on this relatively small site. And when you look at the plan of the green corridors, which we were sent, it's on page 24. It looks quite green, but all those blocks are a tremendous height. Yes. Flipping heck, they're like narrow alleys in scale, and the electricity station in the middle, if that was moved, that would improve the situation. But lo and behold, another block is plunked in where that was, of 30 stories high. That's ridiculous. The whole concept has to be rethought, because there's no way at the end of the day I'm going to vote for this with that number of people living there on that plot with such little green space where they can sit out, they can walk around. It's just ridiculous. No, that's it. No.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, tell us. Thanks, Liz. Caroline, please.
Well, a little bit in contrast with what's been said so far, I actually will go along with the ideology and principle of the development. I think it's interesting to develop a community in a space like this. I do have not difficulty with the scale, but difficulty imagining the scale from what's in front of us. I do know that it's huge and it will generate a lot of people. And therefore, I agree with colleagues about the amount of green space and the shape of the green space and other sorts of facilities that this amount of people will need. I mean, your comments, Peter, about Carvley reminded me also of the village that we share between our wards of Rodley, which has both a park and a nature reserve, as well as many other facilities. I'm not saying this should look like a village or feel like a village, but people have to be able to live the sort of lives everybody wants to live. And given that everybody here will be in flats, the green space is really, really important. And we haven't even touched on balconies yet in this quantity. And for me, the substation is quite an issue. I sort of feel an inevitability that you will come back and say you can't move the substation because it's not affordable. I think the substation does need moving, and I think that needs to become green space. And I think in future iterations of this, Chair, we need to appreciate much more how we're compensating for the volume of those buildings and how the architecture and treatment of those buildings is maximising the impact of that volume and making it a pleasant impact.
Thank you, Caroline. And I should say the substation, that was the general opinion of members on the site visit today. It was, I mean, it is pretty ugly, isn't it? And you can screen it with landscape and all you like, but it's still going to be pretty naff, isn't it? Okay, moving on then. David.
I've got you first here. I agree with very much what everybody else has said. I mean, it's 2,000 households there. Generally, Peter says it's about the same size as Farsley. Like 2 polling districts in most of his wards, probably a fifth to the sixth of actual council ward. And there's hardly any facilities there at all in regards to green space. I mean, I wouldn't have minded if something hadn't been said that would try to improve access to Olbeck Moor or to the piece of green land where the Oak Sports Centre used to be at the bottom of Beeston Hill. but there's nothing about there because you can get through there on paths. But the fact is it's too much. There's too much development there, and we're not talking about putting too many people in too small a space without any facilities, and it's not on. And all you're doing is you're doing what used to happen. We're building slums. We're not building places for people to live.
Thank you, David. Paul?
Well, I wasn't going to go as far as Councillor Blackman with regards to that. But what I was going to say is, actually, Peter, it's a lot worse than Carvely because most people in Carvely have got backyards. but most people in Carvely have got backyards and they've got a lot of green space outside of Carvely, fields to walk in. And as Councillor Gruen says, we haven't talked about balconies, but you are putting people up 42 stories and then not giving them a green space. So you've got to understand that they won't want to stay 42 stories. I'm not suggesting that you're putting the children up there in 42 stories, but, you know, you're going to put a reasonable height with the 3 bedrooms, which are going to be the family accommodation. I mean, I don't want to get into housing mix because the report says you're going to bring that forward at a later date. And we haven't got many hours to go through the housing mix. But as I say, I'm sure that you were watching on YouTube and you saw the previous debate. If not, you can watch it back. But the green space, I think you're just going to have to look at something. I think either removing that block, if you do move the substation and putting a square in, I'm still not sure whether that is enough. I just don't know what is planned for the western side, which is still a car park, whether you have a plan for that or whether you could look at acquiring that with a view to putting something, as Councillor Brooks said, a sports field or something on there. There's got to be something with a reasonable size. And I appreciate that what you've got is very bitty. And you could, in an ideal world, you'd push all that development right onto the roadside and then you'd put all that space in the centre and it might look better. And it will be all the square meterage together, all playing together, all getting on together, fingers crossed. And that would be okay. But you can't do that because you've got building constraints. But I just think you're going up so high with nothing because you won't put a balcony at 42 stories. I don't think I could do a balcony at 42 stories. And you need to look at some of our estates that have got high rise on, where they're only 9 stories, and how much space we put around them when the council built them, which is a long time ago. But they did put a lot of space. It sometimes gives us a lot of problems with that space, but it's there. And you've got the ability you need the ability to put the space there and you've got to manage it so that it doesn't become some of the problems that we have. But it's got to be there. Otherwise, you'll get a community that are very unhappy.
Yes, I agree with just about everything that's been said. We need green space. We really do. Enough that a whole community can do things. In my local park, we have an exercise trail, we have playground, we have a pavilion with a cafe in it and an awning outside, which is a real feature. We have summer band concerts, we have festivals, we have a dog show. I know this well, I'm involved in organising quite a lot of them. And we have tennis courts, we have all sorts of things. And I would like to see for a community this size, we really need to think that way. And that can't happen in these linear walkways, although in the pictures they look attractive, yes, and that's nice. You don't just want paved over between the different buildings, but we need that sort of space for people to actually enjoy themselves. I also know how absolutely freezing cold it was standing outside there this morning. And I know you've addressed the issue of wind and wind tunnels have been talked about, but I am worried about that. And I know that when we have more development adjoining it, that will change matters, but I am concerned about the wind tunnels aspect. And finally, when this does come back, I shall be looking for considerable information about the safety and security, not just within the site, but all the access points into the city centre, out towards the roads, out towards the rest of Holbeck, because there's still a lot of sort of messiness, I would say, in between the different residential areas, and the roads don't help. So I think we really have to look at that very, very strongly if people aren't to feel a bit marooned when they are living there, even if there is a nice green space. Thank you.
Thank you all. There you go. A lot of advice and guidance from panel members around the table. Can we turn to page 72? And Tim has tabled some questions for us to address. Starting with, do members support the proposed scale and form of the development? Well, I think we've expressed our opinion on that, haven't we? Yeah. Do members consider that the emerging approach to landscaping and public realm is acceptable? Again, I think we've expressed opinion on that. Do members consider that the development's emerging provision for transportation and connectivity are acceptable? We haven't really, but we have basically. Al has raised the points about that in our comments. So probably we need more information on that because it has to be connected to the city centre, hasn't it? Okay. Subject to confirmation of details, do members support the emerging approach to sustainable development? No. Nope. Nope.
Rather than just a flat no to all these, I mean, I think we buy into the idea to a degree. Yeah. It just needs to go further. I mean, the green space as it is shown developed is very nice. It just isn't enough of it. And rather than just say no to everything, perhaps we ought to just give them a bit of a clue as to what we feel would make it a yes.
Okay. I'm sure when it comes back there will be a lot more detail. I mean, I'm sure we are happy to see this site come forward. It's been empty for a long time. It's had several planning permissions and nothing has been built there. I think as Andrew said earlier on, he was planning officer on one of them. Two of the sites were talking about a casino on site, weren't they, that we agreed. But it's good to see it come forward, but probably a lot of hard work for applicants and officers to before it comes back here. Can we leave it? Have you got enough, Tim? Are you happy?
I think I've got enough for next year. Thank you.
Do that. Okay. Thank you to Andrew and the team for bringing that forward. And I think I wish you a good afternoon because that's our final item. The next meeting is, I believe, the 24th of March. So safe journey home. Look forward to seeing